welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndall Curtis. As the Reserve Bank Board prepares for its monthly meeting tomorrow, the picture on the economy is a mixed one. Retail trade and trade figures out today were better than expected, but job ads fell for the 7th month in a row, and business surveys by two of the large business groups were gloomy. Analysis by Deloitte Access Economics suggests the government's budget surplus for this financial year is looking more like a $4 billion deficit, and Treasury costings of some of the opposition's business tax policies show they'll be a cost to business. Joining me to discuss the issues of the day are Labor MP Nick Champion and Liberal MP Scott Buchholz. Welcome to you both.
Good morning, Lyndall. Good afternoon.
We'll start now with the policies of costings.
That's Mr Abbott's commitment, that he would slug small businesses right across Australia by removing the instant write-off of small business assets and incentive for those businesses to invest in their businesses and give them money back to the mining industry, which is already travelling in the fast lane. So much for the party of small business.
I am writing to Dr Parkinson, the Secretary of the Treasury, expressing my alarm that the Treasury analysis of our so-called policies seems to have made it into the public domain, but Greens policies have not, and that's despite repeated FOI requests. I'd say this is a concerning treatment of the Treasury by the government. We expect some answers.
Nick, the Prime Minister has defended the Treasury, saying it's full of professional people working in the same way they did for the Howard government. But isn't the problem here not the Treasury, but the fact that the costings were leaked?
Well, look, regardless of whether they were leaked or not, I think blind Freddie can see that Tony Abbott can't make his wish list add up. He says he's going to abolish the carbon price, abolish the mining tax and give company tax cuts. And the only way he can do this is if it costs business more in other areas, or it costs income tax payers more, or it costs pensioners more. At the moment, what they would have us believe is that they were going to have a surplus while cutting taxes for business and while everything else being rosy. I don't think the Liberal Party's costings have added up for some time now, and I think Treasury's just ringing the bell on that.
But if you're asking Treasury to cost some opposition policies that are known, don't you also need to ask Treasury to factor in what the savings to business might be from getting rid of the carbon price and the mining tax?
Well, look, I guess how you cost policies, depends on who's costing them. But I would have thought Treasury would be a pretty sounding board, pretty reliable source. And like I said before, even if you're sort of grade 3 maths sort of graduate, you could tell at the moment that Tony Abbott can't make his wish list add up. It's just an impossibility. He wants to be all things to all people, and pretty sure the bell's going to be rung on him.
Scott, while the Coalition is pledging to cut some taxes, the mining and carbon taxes I mentioned, big business in particular won't be any better than it is now on company tax, because you're increasing company tax to pay for your paid parental leave and then cutting it for big business back to the level it is now. And some concessions for small business will be lost as well if the Coalition wins power, won't they?
Yeah. What's going to happen is that when you cut the revenue, when you cut the carbon tax and you cut the mining tax, obviously it'd be irresponsible then to try and continue to fund Labor's commitments of that revenue that would have come into the coffers. Now, last week, through when the MyEFO period was on, we got to see what revenue was generated from that mining tax, and it was pretty disappointing. So it's an irresponsible government that would continue then to say, well, we've got a tax in place, it's not generating any money, but we're going to continue to try and fund the benefits of that tax. It's not adding up. I mean, if you remember, we left this government with $20 billion in the bank, yes, and nearly $70 billion in assets.
Yes, but on your policies, if you cut the mining tax, given it hasn't raised any money in the first instalment, that's not going to be a huge saving to business when it comes off, is it? And are the savings from cutting the carbon tax, which is for most businesses a saving in maybe electricity costs, will they be more than upset by the tax breaks that business loses?
Well, you need to have a look at the tax receipts generated from companies that get to offload some of their expenditure, i.e. through the carbon tax and through the mining tax. I mean, ultimately, we want businesses to be profitable. We want them to contribute to the nation's tax receipts, and at the moment they're on a downward trajectory. Sovereign risk, consumer confidence, all the issues that are out there, the indicators, the lag indicators on employment, and job advertising rates, they're pretty disgusting at the moment, and we stand on our records. We delivered the 4 largest surpluses in history, and this Labor government has delivered the 4 largest deficits in history. White Roy, a member from up here in Queensland, is 22-year-old. He's a member of the coalition, and he has never seen a Labor surplus in his life.
If we could go, Nick, to the picture across the economy, the figures show, the figures today and the surveys today tend to paint a picture of an economy that may be growing but only weakly. Do you think that's the true picture of the economy?
Well, no, I don't. We've got growth at trend. We've got low inflation, low unemployment, low debt by international standards. We've got a growing economy, low interest rates. Macro-wise, the picture looks very good, and most nations in the world would give their right arm to swap with us. I think when Scott reels off his sort of, talking points, he needs to remember that we're operating in fundamentally different economic eras to the one that Howard and Costello were in. We're now in an era which has seen the global financial crisis and the near collapse of capitalism. And we're now going through a very, very weak period of world growth. What needs to happen internationally is there needs to be fundamental reforms to put us on a more sustainable growth trajectory. So we're talking about different eras, and just reeling off silly talking points out of Liberal Party pollsters, it isn't going to, make the books balance, and it isn't going to make the nation grow. And it's about time we started having a mature economic debate in this country.
Scott, the Reserve Bank...
Nick. It's never your...
Scott, the Reserve Bank meets tomorrow. Do you think the Reserve Bank should cut interest rates again?
Well, the inflation, the underlying inflation is probably just underneath the band for the Reserve Bank. I'd probably think that they'd keep them on hold in the wake of the US presidential elections to see what stimulus comes out of some of the other markets. But just picking up there before on Nick's points about just running off Liberal Party lines, well, that's just rubbish. Eventually, Labor will just have to stop blaming everybody else but themselves for the way that they've run their fiscal management. At the end of the day, if you want to run surpluses, you just simply have to spend less than what you earn, or you have to increase your revenue so that you're generating more than what you spend. I mean, that's not a hard one. Stop blaming everybody else and just muscle up and take it that you guys have really struggled to run surpluses. So if history shows that.
If it's that easy, Scott, do you believe a coalition government, if it won the next election, would be easily able to deliver surpluses in each of the 3 years of that term in government?
Oh, I wouldn't suggest it's going to be easy, Lyndall. No chance in the world, because there's some enormous debt that's been left behind. I mean, we're talking about generating incomes of $4.57 billion from these Treasury leaks. I mean, just one line item alone, $8 billion a year, the nation is now having to service in interest to service this Labor's mismanagement. It's going to be a challenge. I mean, obviously, as our track record, we have a proven capacity to deliver surpluses, far greater. Melbourne Cup's coming up soon. If you're going to back someone in to deliver a surplus, you'd back someone with form, you'd think.
Nick, I might ask one final question on the economy. Is the most potentially worrying sign, despite the fact, as you say, the economy has trend growth, the fact that job ads are continuing to fall, and that expectations in the 2 surveys released today are weak on employment?
Well, look, like I said before, macro-wise, we've got a great economy, which the rest of the world would give their right arm for. I think there is, the scene is set now for lower interest rates. I think when the bank moves is up to it, but I think the economic scene is now set. in order to boost confidence and take the pressure off the dollar, we should have lower interest rates. And I don't think it's just good enough for the opposition to run around the place, with these sort of half-baked history lessons on one hand and these completely irresponsible advocacy of short-term austerity on the other. We've seen what Scott advocates operate in the United Kingdom, and what it's led to is a double-dip recession. So, if you want to put thousands of people out of work in the name of this silly idea that you can balance the nation's budget like you balance a household budget, then vote for the coalition and risk thousands of jobs and a recession.
Nick, talking about putting people under work, while your government's been in place, bankruptcies have jumped 48%. So don't talk about putting people out of work, champion.
And unemployment and interest rates are low.
Seventh consecutive decline in job advertising.
We might now move on, Scott. This week we'll see the US election. Scott Buchholz says voluntary voting in the US. Do you think it'd be a good idea here?
Mate, I like the idea of compulsory voting. I had the opportunity to go over and work on McCain's campaign there earlier in my political career. I just see that there's an enormous socio-economic group that gets left behind in the US system that don't go roll out and vote. So as a result, I don't think a lot of their policy structure over there is driven around looking after that sector of the market. I think with a population here of 22 million people, I think it's fair and equitable that every Australian has the right to cast their vote. And by having compulsory voting, it just gets them to the, it makes the decision makers on both sides of the House more acutely aware of their needs.
And Nick, do you think compulsory voting is a plus, or do you have some doubts about that?
Well, the Labor Party is obviously committed to it in our policy platform, but speaking personally, I think it's probably an unnecessary burden that we're putting on the citizen, that the states, it's an unnecessary obligation, I think, to put on people. People should have the right to vote, and they should have the right not to vote. It should be an individual choice, I think, in theory and in principle, although in practice, of course, we've had compulsory voting for so long that I doubt things will change in the short term.
And why don't you think it does the job in enfranchising the whole electorate, in making sure that people aren't left behind?
Well, I think that theory is a little perplexing. I think people would be motivated to vote by politicians, and I think any time you have compulsion, you actually bring to the polls people who don't care about politics or elections, and that tends to, I think, have a deadening impact and a tendency to re-elect governments rather than to put pressure on the political class. So I think if you want to motivate people, if you have to motivate people to vote, then you have to come up with good policies. But again,
Nick,
it would be a big change in Australian politics.
On that note, we'll just run out of time. We'll have to leave it. Scott Buchholz and Nick Champion, thank you very much for your time.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, Nick.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time tomorrow. Good night.